Good morning and welcome to Gunner Shot. As you can see, I have with me uh, Dr. John Helmer. As usual, we're going to have this talk. It's kind of becoming a weekly talk, and I'm quite enjoying it, right? Because John brings a perspective which is completely, you know, different from what we in India normally have a idea of how things are. And I'd like to thank John for that. John, welcome back to Gunner Shot after a week. How things in your place, your neck of the woods, if I put it in an American manner.
Well, it's the neck on the chopping block. Thank you for having me, Ravi. Let's look at the necks on the chopping block. Let's look at the chopping blocks. For a start, just to orient readers, my theory of realism in politics is an equation of three elements: money plus votes plus bullets. If you have them all, you win. If you're minus one of them, you might win, you might lose. If you're missing all of them, you're going to lose. You're going to be defeated. You may even be destroyed. So money, votes, and politics dictate all, not just Russian, but Chinese, Indian, American, you name it. Power politics works with that equation. And so weaker states, which doesn't have all the money, all the votes, and all the bullets, have to work out how to defeat the bigger giant that does think like Trump thinks. It has them all. So here's where we are today in Moscow. It's a very serious moment because of the impending threat of what Trump calls his beautiful armada, parked in the Sea of Oman, pointed at Iran. From a Russian point of view, and I've got to look down at my notes, I'll have something for those who want to disagree with me to read in a few hours' time in Moscow. But let me just try to indicate how things have accelerated from Russian point of view. On the 16th, well, go backwards. Yesterday, Friday, Ali Larijani presented the full Iranian war plan at the Kremlin. Now, Mr. Larijani is a very significant figure in the Supreme National Security Council of Iran. So let's call that the National Security Council in American terms, the Security Council in Russian terms. India has its own. So Ali Larijani was in the Kremlin yesterday, and the Kremlin's communique is interestingly blank. It simply says he was there. There's no photograph showing who he was accompanied by, what military officers or intelligence officers were on either side of the Iranian-Russian table. That's very important that Larijani was there. Before Larijani appeared, Ali Shamkhani, who represents the Iranian Supreme Leader Khamenei, announced on the 28th evening, and quoting, any military action by America of any kind at any level will be considered the start of a war, and the response will be immediate, comprehensive, and unprecedented. Now, that's a declaration we'll come to in a minute. If you go back in time, starting from around January the 16th, President Putin telephoned first Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, and an hour or two later, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. That was on the 6th. Then on 29th, so this last week, there was a summit meeting at the Kremlin with the UAE ruler, Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan, MBZ for short, and that obviously discussed all forms of Russian Emirati cooperation, including the strategic pact which MBZ has signed with Mr. Modi, the memorandum of intention, let's call it, and the impending threat of war that would be deeply threatening to the UAE on the Saudi side and on the American side and on the Iranian side. the meeting with Larijani followed the summit meeting with MBZ. So what we see is, to sum it up, President Putin has been trying to mediate between the sides, and he did so after the telephone calls with Netanyahu and Pezeshkian, in order to stop the possibility of an open war. What exactly the military assistance Russia is providing, according to the Russia-Iran treaty that was signed last January, so it's a year old, was on the table with Larijani yesterday, and it's top secret. I'm not in a position to say, but if I did know, I wouldn't be on this program, because I wouldn't be saying it, would I? Now, what we have here is a Russian concern that Trump's beautiful armada does not open fire. If that's the case, and counting up what the bullets are that the Iranian side has, the Hormuz Strait will be closed. It will be mined. Any attempt to demine it by US vessels will be attacked from shore, under the sea, over the sea, and so on. Now, you can see that the oil markets of the world have begun to react to this threat. Obviously, a closure of Hormuz would raise the price of oil dramatically. It would impact India. It will impact China. It impacts Russia in a positive sense. The price of oil will go up, and the oil sanctions against Russia will be overlooked as everyone scrambles for supply at a rising price. However, the problem for the oil markets is disruption and rising price. So if you look at the oil futures market, which bets on the future price of Brent marker oil or WTI, West Texas Intermediate Oil, WTI, it's up 20%, 21% for WTI, 19% up for Brent since the beginning of the month. And the acceleration of the increase has been dramatic in the last few days. So that's money talking. The money is saying the prospect of a closure of Hormuz and a sudden spike in crude oil prices is increasingly likely. One chance in 5 if you convert 20% increase into probability. I'll leave aside our readers' interest in the platinum, palladium, gold, and silver markets. They've come off all their highs because of the basic changes in internal US Federal Reserve interest rate policies and what have you. I don't see the gold price, the silver price fall as reflecting fear of an oil price spike, but there will be a turnaround if there is a closure of Hormuz. So that's a very interesting way in which the money's talking. We'll come to the votes in a minute. The Trump administration, by contrast, has been issuing very comforting, actually wishful thinking predictions for a drop in crude oil price over this year and a drop in retail gasoline prices at the pump when the US summer driving season starts. Now, just remember, folks, and you do, obviously, Ravi, that the summer this year for the driving season in the United States is the start of the congressional election campaign. So if you've got lines in front of a gas station in the United States, and if you've got people grumbling very loudly about supply and cost of petrol, gasoline, gas, depending on which form of English you speak, then you've got loss of votes to Trump in the midterms and a very sharp repudiation of his management of the domestic economy. Now, that's already quite serious, the level of disapproval of Trump's performance overall, which is about 12%, and it's not improving. And the level of disapproval of his inflation performance is over 20%, and it's getting worse. So no matter how much Trump tweets, speaks, to the improvement in inflation, American voters don't think so. So any serious oil price shock, will affect votes for Trump. There's another element to this, and that's bullets. The bullets are obviously weighted in the US favor, okay? But on the other hand, the capacity of the Iranians to fight back and inflict serious casualties, as they promised to do, with swarms of drones and swarms of missiles aimed at the fleet in the Sea of Oman and the US bases that are strung up the east coast of the Persian Gulf and all the way into Jordan. The threat there is US casualties. Okay, and speaking as an ex-Carter administration official, this is how the White House thinks. The combination of, pardon me, blood and oil kills US presidents at election time. And it killed LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson's attempt to win re-election in 1968. If everybody would just remember a little, LBJ was beginning to visibly lose the Vietnam War in 1968. And the casualty rate was beginning to go up. At the same time, inflation, casualty rate means body bags coming home, blood lost. At the same time, inflation rate was jumping. It starts low numbers. I won't bother telling you the numbers. People can read them in the Dances with Bears later on. That inflation was going up. So what did Lyndon Johnson do on March 31, 1968? He gave a speech about peace in Vietnam and then resigned from the presidency. He announced he would not run again. Look at the date, March 31, 1968, versus the election day in November of that year. Look where we are now. We're basically 2 months away, February, March, from that date. That's arguably the deadline Trump faces. And if he starts a shooting war with Iran over the next few hours or days, he's going to accelerate the LBJ problem. He faces blood and inflation, oil inflation, at the same time. And as I've just said, from a White House point of view, that's a killer of election chances for presidents. So the Russian side understands these things. Also, the Russian side understands its relatively limited capacities to fight more than one war at a time. And I think we've said before, and I think you and our audience understands, that when you're engaged in fighting the rest of the world, certainly the United States and its allies on a battlefield like the Ukraine, it's a priority to win. It's a priority to resolve, if you can, on terms that you've won on the battlefield. What's the Russian capacity to help Iran defend? Now, lots of people think that the Russians abandoned the Assad regime and lost Syria. The argument would continue that the Russian side failed to do enough to protect President Maduro in Venezuela. The argument continues that the Russian side is now faced with a Trump takeover, trade blockade followed by military pressure externally against Cuba. What will Russia do there? We talked last time, Ravi, about the Russian attempt, President Putin's attempt, the Security Council's attempt to work out a three-way swap. Give us what we need and demand and have won on the battlefield with our blood in the Ukraine. They've told the Americans, General Grinkevich, Stephen Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Joshua Grunbaum. They've told them that. And we will step away from what you do in Greenland as you build your bases to attack us in the Arctic. And we will step away from what you plan to do in the genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza. Swap is a temporary accommodation. You know, fight one war at a time strategy on the part of the Russians. So something very interesting popped up yesterday afternoon, Friday afternoon in Moscow, when Vzgliad, which is an online security analysis platform, and a very valuable and interesting one to watch because it's Kremlin supported, and its articles tend to air Security Council debates of the factional kind. What does the general staff think? What does military intelligence think? What does our foreign intelligence think? What does the foreign ministry think? What does the Kremlin think? It's one of the only ways in which you can decode that argument. All governments, and or especially democratic ones like Russia, have platforms that air, fly balloons, discuss the possibilities. And this piece, which I've translated and I'll publish a few hours' time on Dances with This, airs a twofold warning. It's basically warning that Iran can't really defend against a massive US air and long-range naval attack. Its air defenses are inadequate. It doesn't have the technology to counter the jamming and all that sort of stuff. I might say that this article doesn't mention a word about the Russian assistance on all these Iranian vulnerabilities. They may be there, and that may be the hint. On the other hand, the piece argues that the Iranians have the counter if they go to total war of using swarms of drones and their missile capability to inflict casualties on US bases and to close Hormuz. By closing the Strait of Hormuz, perhaps you'll put up a map, Ravi, but in any case, the audience can see, I put up the maps in Dances with Bears in a couple of hours' time. Once you close Hormuz, the calculus, money, bullets, and votes work against Trump. So the Russian advice, the rational strategic advice, and I'm not saying for certain this is what Larijani and Putin agreed yesterday, would be don't call the American bluff because Trump will call it off. He will back down. Make sure that your defense is so credible that he will back down. That's where I think we are a Saturday morning in Moscow.
Right. So Saturday morning in Moscow says don't back down. But what are Trump's options? How do you look at it from the other point side? Do you think Trump can back down given the fact that he's committed so much there? And in case he has to back down, he has to take something home. Because having committed such a large force in that area, and if he doesn't get anything to take home, he's going to lose the election anyway. So where is that line going to come where what Iran gives him what he wants and he gets what he wants? And for that, I probably think you have to define what does Trump want.
Good questions, Ravi. Let's start with the last one. Trump wants to win, always win. Win money first and become a multi-billionaire out of the presidency, something nobody's ever done. The more, let's say, Nobel Prize-winning presidency he thinks he's won, the more money he, his wife, his children, his associates like Witkoff, Lutnick, Bessent, and others, the more money they collect for their own pockets, for their bigger constituents, and the more money they collect, the more votes they can assure themselves first in the midterms. And you're right, they will make certain losses. Will they lose control of the Congress? Likely, but narrowly. Can they manage a narrow minority control? Yes, they can. So the motivation of the administration is to cut its losses in November, not enlarge its losses. Winning is winning money. That's my answer to your first point. It's not, you're asking me to answer as an American, as a former White
Yeah,
House.
and I get, yeah.
Second, how can he back down without looking as if he's backing down? If you go back to Lyndon Baines Johnson's withdrawal speech, and I've put it up on my site, it'll be up any minute now, you can see him discuss himself as a peacemaker. It's really quite interesting to listen to the way he describes himself. And of course, he can speak English more sequentially and conceptually than Trump can. But the idea of combining, I'm the peacemaker when I'm losing this war, and I'm going to look after my country by backing down, in that case, backing out of the election. It's very similar to the present situation. So to go to your question, how can Trump back down without appearing to back down? How can he run away while appearing to declare victory? Well, let's look at the precedents he's established in the past year. His idea of obliterating Iran was to arrange in advance with Iran a bombing raid against which Iran put up no defense except on the ground, where they protected their nuclear warfare capabilities from being destroyed. Then Trump announced obliteration and victory, about obliteration 8 times in 3 minutes, and stops. Second, he moves on to the second attack, which was to assist the internal regime-changing riots of earlier this month. Now that they've all been defeated, what does Trump say? You mustn't shoot, hang, or otherwise execute all those people, all subject to indictments for mass murder. Otherwise, help's on the way. Well, the help is on the way. The Iranians will give him a couple of assurances in which he'll declare victory. One, they won't hang anybody, at least not yet. I wouldn't count on their having very comfortable quarters in prisons across Iran. Second, Iran is offering various kinds of negotiation. At the same time, the Iranians perfectly well understand that Witkoff is not a genuine negotiator. He's a camouflage artist while he prepares the Israeli and American attacks on the Iranian negotiators. So the Iranian offer to continue negotiating on a formula that Trump could accept has got to be a particularly guarded one, given that the deception operation and the killing operation that the Israelis and Americans went through last year. But let's look at some other Trump backing retreats and backing down. Let's look at Minneapolis. Let's look at his militarization of U.S. Democratic voting cities by the dispatch of these ICE forces, Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE. They've murdered 2 people in Minneapolis, and the result of those murders is an intense polarization of opinion in the United States domestically. But the polarization has not worked as Trump and his particular advisor on domestic brown shirt fascism, Stephen Miller, the man in the White House whose belief is you win elections by polarizing, and then you declare emergencies, and then you prevent the opposition from having the votes to win. Leaving Miller aside, what has Trump had to do? He's had to pull back, send in a super boss to Tom Homan, I believe the man's name is, to cover the retreat of ICA from direct confrontation in the street, which might result either in more killing by ICE or by casualties on the ICE side as the demonstrators and protesters become militarily more accomplished. So he is retreating in Minneapolis while declaring a kind of victory. He's done something similar in Washington, D.C. He's done something similar in Los Angeles and Portland, Oregon. In other words, He's achieved nothing that militarization of the cities was intended to do. It has won no votes. It has increased the danger to the administration of killing. And he's backed down, run away. Let's look again at Venezuela. What happened there? Still a matter of controversy, but arguably he's assembled the armada, he's blockaded, which is an act of war, not an act of piracy, an act of war. And instead of installing the regime the United States has so carefully been preparing, the CIA has been preparing for years, and for which it obtained international legitimacy when Ms. Machado won the Nobel Peace Prize. Instead of installing her, the deal was reached that Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, takes over regime control and gives the United States what they demand, but not all, maybe not even 50%, and Machado goes to prison forever in the United States. I'd call that a retreat, wouldn't you? I wouldn't call that a victory. I would call it a show of force that Trump will be satisfied with and is satisfied with. So back to you, Ravi. What would be the formula?
Yeah, I think there is a formula which he's probably worked out in his mind as to how to deal with this situation which he's in Iran. And that would probably do a deal with the, Iranians of some kind of overseeing or monitoring of their weapons or their nuclear program, or getting that nuclear program on board with a swap to allow Iranian oil to come on market. Because if that happens, it's a Trump victory, really, actually. And it also benefits the Iranians because they'll be off sanctions. Maybe I'm talking of an extreme kind of a situation or outcome. Do you think between just entering negotiations to getting to some outcome, you think there is any feasibility of all this happening?
Well, so long as the talking starts and continues, there's always possibility. I can't assign probability because the United States and Israel have established they don't negotiate at the point of the gun. First, they shoot the negotiators, and then they threaten the survivors. It's the traditional response to that is to fight back and shoot the negotiators, send their heads back in baskets. The Iranians can't send Vitkov's head back in a basket to Washington. I don't believe that politically Trump can go as far as openly relieving Iran of the current oil sanctions. The Europeans are busy enforcing sanctions against Iranian tankers, even those flying the Russian flag, as happened with the Marinera off Scotland a few days ago, and we talked about that. I think what can happen is a pause in which the Armada will look less and less beautiful, much as it did the Armada under Houthi attack. I would have to, do we say that the Houthi resistance, Al-Ansar's resistance in Yemen, was defeated by Anglo-American bombing, Anglo-American missile attack, and NATO allied fleets? No, I don't think we could say the Houthis were defeated. I think we could say closed the Red Sea. They severely damaged Israeli ports, including the virtual shutdown of Eilat. I think that in that conflict, the US simply had to stop and basically say we've defeated the Houthis and walk away. And now what we have is, on the basis of the Palestine settlement that Hamas signed, Al-Ansar agreed to suspend attacks on fleets moving in that route. And so we see a gradual return of tanker fleets to the Red Sea. What we have now also seen, and you've very ably analyzed it, is the opening of a new war in Yemen, also aimed at control of the ports and the waterways and the trade routes. And that's a war between Saudi Arabia and the UAE, with various parties behind the Saudis and holding their hands, like the Pakistanis and the US, and the UAE now signing up with India and Russia. So this is it's a cliche for podcasters to announce to everybody listening, this is very complicated, meaning I'm unable to tell you how to sort out this complication. Let me put it to you politically. The way to sort out this complication is to count the money, count the votes, count the bullets. Then you can figure out what outcomes, the various complications are sought by each of the players. And I think with that simple calculus, we can all do the arithmetic. Trump, we're going to look very stupid, and I will look very stupid if, having said all of this, Trump launches tonight, on Saturday night, if he does. But I think he will not. Your question was, how does he not while appearing to have done so? Answer, he'll figure out a way to have declared victory like he did against the Houthis. But his real victory counts is the money and the votes. He's got to reduce inflation. He can't have a gasoline price hike. And he's got bigger wars to fight elsewhere.
Yep, I go with you completely. The whole story is about money, votes, and bullets. I think that's a very interesting way of putting things, and it's realism. And we'll see where Iran goes, because I don't think Trump has many options to launch into Iran. At best, an odd missile strike or something like that. It could be well pre-arranged, and get into negotiations is the way forward. Look, let's switch to another topic on which I thought I must get your view. Recently, EU and India have done a deal. Right? And this deal has come after a good about 17 years. And it, the last 9 months were, pushed at top speed by Trump's antics. Trump's antics with EU, Trump's antics with India. They pushed. Simultaneously, we also signed a deal with, UAE, kind of a super strategic partnership. And then UAE has done a deal with Russia, and India and Russia are on good wicket, and all this. Now, given this situation, how does Russia view the India-EU deal, and where do you think this is going forward? And given the fact that today India is in a capacity to talk on both sides of the divide between Russia and EU, and things will only get better. Is there a role India plays between Russia and EU and their issues? And of course, then you're talking of Ukraine also. Or how does Russia leverage this deal to its advantage? Or how does Russia play this whole game? Because this is one factor which many of us have not discussed in India. We have discussed how US will react. We have discussed how China will react. We have not discussed the Russian angle in this whole story. Your views on that? I'll be very interested in that.
There's been no serious Russian analysis yet, openly in public, from the think tanks and from the ministries. Let me try to summarize the kind of sentiments that answer your question that I pick up in discussions with sources. In the first place, it's to India's strategic advantage, the terms of this FTA. The Jameson Greer, the US special trade representative, admitted as much. India won this one. That's quite right. Yes, that then splits the administration with dissent saying, you won, we're going to punish you for winning. You haven't done enough to get the Europeans to stop importing your Russian crude supplied petroleum products and so forth and so on. Anything that splits the American side or splits the Europeans from the US side is seen as strategically and tactically and operationally positive in Moscow. That's one thing. The second thing is the terms. And it's a pity Aaron isn't here, but perhaps you can respond on the issue of the choice India made to procure whatever it is, I think 144 Rafales, French-made fighters, jet fighters, for the Indian Air Force. And is that, and I'm asking a Russian question, an alternative to and a defeat of the Russian Sukhoi 57? Now, my sources in both places say it's not a defeat. They're parallel. And the negotiation for the Su-57 continues. Both of those are win for all sides, because the technology transfer to India, the capacity that India and its Air Force will acquire as a result of these aircraft, airframe, air arming, avionics systems, is beneficial to India and increases its sovereignty and its independence to fight the wars that it's fighting. You know this better than me, and maybe you should tell me to shut up and you'll spell it out. But there is a Russian question. Is this the beginning of a reduction, let's say, of the Indian-Russian strategic relationship? For the time being, neither the Indian sources I have privately nor the Russian sources I have privately think that's the case. It's understood in Moscow that India is rising, and as it rises, it draws US venom and opposition. Therefore, to demonstrate Indian sovereignty and independence, there has to be real moves, and this is one of them. Reduction of oil purchasing under the secondary sanctions was another of them. But the Russian side, I believe, does not see that the Rafale or the EU FTA, the free trade agreement, as threatening underlying foundations of the Indian-Russian strategy. Then there's a third issue on which you should talk, not me. And it's a domestic debate in India. It's an internal security debate too. What concessions has the Indian side made that would allow the EU to export goods, for example, cars, that would in any way weaken India's plan to industrialize? Because cars are dual use. You build cars now, you can build tanks and armored vehicles and all sorts of war-making vehicles in the future. India must. Countries like Australia abandoned their car industry to the Americans and the offshore sources, and they have no capacity to build cars anymore. You see Trump trying to do the same to Canada. The small and middle-sized powers that give up industrialization become vassal states and are easy to be integrated in US hegemony. India's committed to go the other way. So the Russian concern is that the strategic alliance is intended to build Indian sovereignty and capacity and help fuel by technology transfer, by raw material transfer and trade. And this is a big condition on the Russian side, Russian side has to have investment in India. It must build up its base comparable. It's nowhere comparable to existing European or US or even Chinese investment in India. This EU agreement is an incentive for President Putin to honor what he told Prime Minister Modi. Russia will invest, along with increased trade commitments, come increased money commitments, banking commitments, credit commitments, and the rebuilding of an industrial base in India. That must happen. If it doesn't, Russia has no reason to complain that the Europeans are doing this. So my understanding of the European car deal is that it's luxury cars that India's car making plant have very little interest in building and have no war making future, and really basically go expensively to the upper class in India. I don't know if that's true, but it certainly doesn't affect Russia's ambitions and Russia's intentions. On the diamond issue, this is a small part of the FTA, but it directly affects Russia. Russia's been a major source of natural rough diamonds to the Indian polishing industry. I'm not saying anything new to acknowledge that India dominates the world's diamond polishing industry and has tried also to develop lab-grown diamonds as a second line. Lab-grown diamonds are not really the panacea for the diamond business that they were thought to be. There are too many Indian lab-grown diamonds. There are too many lab-grown diamonds everywhere in the world. And what the Russian diamond industry needs, this is a maximum, I've forgotten exact numbers, used to be a diamond correspondent, can't remember the numbers, but I think the worldwide diamond business is worth, from mining to shops, jewelry shops, about 30 billion. It's relatively small beer in the numbers we're talking about. But Russia needs to keep its diamond mines going. It needs to keep up its diamond exports to India. Otherwise, the Russian state budget has to buy diamonds that have been mined and stock them until the price rises. The concession that was made in the FT is to reduce the diamond import tariff primarily on Belgium from 5% to 2.5%. It's not much. The diamantaires I've spoken to over the last few days think it doesn't make much difference. The Indians I've spoken to point out that the principal diamantaires in Antwerp are Indian. So if you reduce the
it doesn't matter.
It's still in the family, as you might say. And it increases the power of Delhi to tell the Indians at Rosy Blue and the other well-known Indian diamond polishing firms and marketing firms in Belgium that they owe India more of a living than they've been paying for to date.
Yeah, I think you raised interesting points and interesting perspectives. Let me give my view about this whole thing so that, your Russian, the Russians understand this deal. From a macro perspective, the India-EU deal has nothing much to do with Russia. That's the way I looked at it, and that's the way things have gone. It's more for a hedge against China and USA. Because, if you look at the trade India-US, India-China, and India-EU as a whole trade is approximately the same. In fact, India-EU is more if you combine the whole lot. So as a result, we in India, we were getting stuck between China and India. For us, it was becoming a case of USA or China. EU offers a third route. That's the first thing. Our equation with Russia was always stood. It doesn't change. It doesn't change even now. That's the way I look at it. So given that macro issue, and even for the EU, it was the same. They were also getting squeezed between USA and China, and more from China. They needed an outlet, and that is where it is. Now, regarding the issue of Rafales versus Su-57 and all that, I have to give you a macro idea of where the Indian Air Force is heading. The Indian Air Force is heading into a system where, the bulk of their fleet I wouldn't say bulk of the fleet, 1/3 of their fleet would come from Rafale. I think that's a call already taken with 36 Rafales already in service. 26 more contracted for the aircraft carrier version, the marine version, and 114. So that is one chunk which is going to stay with India for the next 30 to 40 years with its upgradations. The second lot of aircraft which are going to form a big chunk of the Indian Air Force system, fighters, is the based on the Su-30s and the upgrades. Eventually getting on to Su-57 if the deal goes good. I mean, I have a problem with the Su-57. Things have to change, maybe politically and even because we were in the Su-57 program earlier and we got out. Without getting into the nitty gritty of that whole story, that hurdle has to be brought around with technology transfer, everything. So uh, that equation of India, Russia, Su-30, Su-57 will continue. It has nothing to do with the Rafales. Because our
Yes.
requirement is such. Okay. Right. And the third will be largely indigenous, based on Tejas, where we
Mm.
get engines from somewhere and build our AMCA. That's a thing which will happen. I think Indian Air Force, from a fighter perspective, is going on three tracks. Right. That's balanced from Indian perspective because it de-risks a lot of things for India and builds autonomy in this whole business. The second part of the Air Force thing is based on the transport aircraft. For the transport aircraft, we've already got a fleet from USA, so we cannot get out of a deal with USA. But what India is doing is we've already gotten to a deal with Spain, which is fundamentally we're talking of EU, right? So we've got into a deal with Spain for the Tata Airbus deal, C-95 transport aircraft, which has already started. And I see that going forward in a big way as days roll out.
Mm.
Simultaneously, India has started talking with Russia for the replacement for the old AN-12s and AN-32s with the IL-114, if I'm not mistaken, which is an equivalent aircraft of the AN-32, which is a mid-sized thing which can take about 30 to 40 passengers or a platoon-sized force into air combat. All right. So I think we've already started. So I think that will also continue. Plus the fact that India has already started talking to Embraer to put up a factory here. Adani Embraer with a deal is thing. So we're looking at Brazil. All India is doing is it's diversifying its options.
Mm.
And so I don't see any dilution of the fact of any deal between India and Russia or the
Mhm.
dilution of the relationship between India and Russia. While I see a strengthening of what we are doing with EU, which is good for both of us, to be very honest. Well, a certain amount of high-end cars being brought from EU and all is okay because India doesn't need high-end cars in great numbers, nor will it have high-end cars in great numbers. It's a very small segment.
Yeah.
Regarding the other things where the European autos will come and invade India and take over the auto sector, I don't think that's going to happen because many EU firms have come to India, have burnt their fingers and gone out. Like Volkswagen has shut shop completely here. Yeah, BMW has succeeded to some extent. So has Audi, and so has Benz. They have done well, but uh, many of the others have not succeeded in India, right? And India, over a period of time, has developed its own auto industry.
Yes.
We have, and it's pretty robust. I don't see, and it's a very competitive market. The Indian auto market is very, very competitive, right? Why I'm saying is, when I bought my first car, I didn't have an option. I had
Mm.
an option of one amongst two cars in India. Today, for every segment, I have an option of 10 cars in India. It's so competitive, right? And you'll be surprised, even the Chinese don't make headway here. Even the Chinese, when they came, couldn't make headway here. And, it's very competitive. So it's a different story. I don't think that's going to affect anyone else in the whole thing. As far as diamonds are concerned, to be very honest, I'm not qualified to speak on it, nor have I tracked that thing. But from what you're saying and what I can make out the logic of the whole thing, we have a huge diamond industry, and the diamond industry is dominated in terms of cutting and finishing in India and Surat. It's only in one city. All this happens in one city only. But it's a niche segment. And I think in this niche segment, the interconnectivities from the mine to the product are so high that I don't think any government policy can take it off. Because even if you take off the government policies and or governments change, policies change, and alignments change, the fundamentals of this thing don't change. So I don't think it affects too much. But like I said, I'm glad that you said that the India EU deal has not raised hackles in Moscow or raised fears in Moscow. That is reassuring to the Indian thing. Right? I hope I've clarified all the issues which people from Moscow would be thinking of. I only see this thing growing. Why the dip in oil take off at this point of time from Moscow? All that is temporary. I think over a period of time, India has learned how to handle all these issues with the USA, and we are very clear as to how to handle USA. I mean, one more point which I want to put across to everyone who is seeing it is, much like what USA has handled other countries who they consider have gone out of their track or out of their ambit or out of their diktat, they can't do it with India for the simple reason India has never listened to their diktats. We've never listened to USA beyond a point. We've had an equation with USA, and if that equation is good, very good. If equation is bad, so be it. And we know how to handle USA very well. Right? I mean, that's our history. After all, history is that, when USA was backing Pakistan in the 1971 war, we showed them two fingers, and we've been showing them two fingers throughout our history. It's only in the past, 10, 15 years that a certain amount of partnership we developed with USA, fundamentally to have a handle on China. And the way China is going, I think that this is my view, that handle will slowly recede, and you'll see us being transactional with the USA. Because USA on its own volition has destroyed the strategic partnership. Our relationship with USA is no more strategic, it's a relationship. Right?
Well,
and
I think I would call the US model the East India Company.
And Indians, whatever, right?
Well, it's
we know we are not going to go back into that story ever. That's all. And India of that time, India of now is a completely two different sets of things. We'll leave it at that. Before we close off, I just want your view, and in the passing, maybe these things are not too well discussed or even spoken of in Russia. What is the Russian reaction to what's happening in China? And, the tussle between Zhang Yuxia and Xi Jinping, or the military and the politics. How do the Russians view it? And I do understand nothing much has come out in Russia. But your view on this, and what are the latest there?
I promised to answer that question, Ravi, but if you don't mind, I'll add one last couple of elements on the FTA. We didn't mention labor. We didn't mention labor mobility. This is a very important element of the current, strategy that President Putin worked out with Prime Minister Modi. Labor mobility means a combination of high-tech, high-skilled Indians are going in a different direction from the United States. This creates a diaspora, a new expanded diaspora in Russia, and it creates a new and expanded diaspora in Europe, not simply England. That
Yep.
diaspora has very, very important political weight in the future, long after we're dead. That creating a diaspora means creating, from Indian strategic point of view, a constituency abroad that will be loyal to the home interests. And it's diverse. It's not simply diversification. It's the creation of two major pools or diasporae of Indian brains, money, and political influence in Russia and in Europe, offsetting the kind of influence that the Indian diaspora currently has, where it's lined up with the Trump administration. So labor mobility also is a major input to Russia on the IT level. So I need to say that and see and to cast it in its political context. The second part is that if you look at the FTA's handling of Indian farmers, you can see how strategically the Prime Minister has maximized the vote-getting power of the trade for Indian products to move into Europe. But Indian products are grown on the farm with Russian fertilizers. So any significant boom, any significant independence and growth of the Indian farming industry raises the benefits for Russian fertilizer, and again, not simply export of raw materials, but increased downstream development of fertilizers and farm support, let's call it, biochemical support for Indian agriculture on the Russian side. So there's a combination win-win effect on those two areas, labor mobility and increased farm growth on the Indian side.
Thanks for those. Thanks for those clarifications. I think they're very important clarifications, and I think many times when you look at the glitzier things, the smaller things, but the more meaningful things get lost. Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, over to you.
Nobody in Delhi having to breathe burn stubble is in any doubt about the influence of farmers on Russia, on Indian politics. Okay, but on that stubble comes Russian fertilizer, and that's where the new crop starts, and that's where our story begins. To come back to your key question, there is no debate comparable to your expositions of the current trouble in China and the conflict and the purge between the presidency and the Central Military Commission, between the party, the army, and President Xi's Politburo. So far as I can tell, there's no discussion of it. However, what I can tell you is the little footnote. The little footnote was announced day before yesterday in Moscow's Vedomosti. This is the 27th of January. How many days away is that? That's 4 days away. This reports that the Russian Defense Minister, Andrei Belousov, held a video conference with Dong Jun, the Minister of Defense of China. This was a Ministry of Defense announcement. And I'll just read you the paragraph and we can then elaborate on it. Belousov noted that the Russian-Chinese strategic partnership is steadily developing and cooperation between the armed forces of the two countries is organized at a high level. Quotes, given the dynamic changes, this is Belousov talking, in the global military and political situation, a regular exchange of views on military cooperation is in demand. Well, it's not much of a smokescreen, is it? Because what they must have been talking about is Minister Belousov asks Minister Dong, what the hell is going on?
And there are no answers. There are no easy answers for this.
Shall I leave it at that?
Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Right. I think we've covered a lot of ground today. The most important and burning topic being Iran, where we've got a different view from what we've been seeing from the Western press. And I think we must thank Dr. John Helmer for that. Then we've also touched upon the India EU deal and the Russian view of that. I think those perspectives are different. And of course, the fact is that, which I keep telling to everyone, the India EU deal is not about Russia. It's more about our hedge against China and USA. And to offset what the India USA trade deal has not given us, or rather, that why, if in the absence of the India USA trade deal, you needed an alternative and a third way, and that's that. It is not at the cost of Russia, right? And at the end, I'd like to thank Dr. John Helmer for having joined us today and given his views on this, because his views are important to all of us on Ghana Short, and I'm sure he carries this with Dances with Bears, and they also get a view as to what's happening in India. And in fact, I'd request all those people who are watching this on Dances of Bears to understand and come and flock to John, because John is giving a window into India, which is the future, to his audience. Right? With this,
before I
John,
go out the door, before I go out, thanks for the thanks. But before I go out the door, there has to be a Russian warning. This is a yellow flag. Russia understands what fair weather friends the Europeans are. Remember,
yeah, we know that.
the Russians would.
We know
The
that.
Germans are only as reliable as their domestic politics dictate and as the US pressure on Germany dictates. France is a fair weather friend. It's now at war with Russia. The same of the UK. And the same with all of the Europeans, especially von der Leyen in charge. The answer is you do what you're best to lock up European money, European votes, and European bullets in your interest. But if the US decides to mobilize Europe against you the way the US has mobilized Europe against Russia, Europe will switch. They switch as quickly as the wind blows. And the best person who illustrated that in Delhi was the Polish foreign minister, Radek Sikorski, recently. Treat the Sikorski appearance and the Polish behavior as an indication of, yes, the FTA with the European Union is excellent platform. Treat Sikorski as a warning. That platform is susceptible to earthquake shocks.
I take it, and we know it. We realize it, and we are, to a large extent, we are going into this with open eyes. Let me put it. Thanks for the thing. Thanks for the reminder, and that's it should form a good opinion and make a good opinion for everyone who's dealing with EU on this issue. Thanks once again, John. It was a great day, great time spending an hour with you, and I look forward to it. We'll get together the next time. Till then, thank you.